This is your spoiler warning for Spyfall Part 2. If you haven't seen this episode, then stop watching now. This episode picks up rather well, starting with both the scene of the Doctor in this strange setting as well as our main companions on the airplane. These two cut together very well, and I love how the Doctor talks to herself as though she were trying to reassure her companions. I thought that was a really neat touch that tied the scenes together rather well as adding something that I hadn't seen the Doctor do before, at least to my knowledge. The way that the cliffhanger is resolved with the airplane is pretty good, at least in my estimation. It's really fun to see Ryan following these clues that lead to them being able to control and land the plane, and that was a fun start to the episode. And of course, the way in which they land the plane is a little bit ridiculous, but it really didn't bother me because this episode is in part fitting in with a James Bond style of a story, so it has a little more license to be that goofy. Also, I appreciated that we did see the way in which the Doctor saved them towards the end of the episode, and that did help to justify the opening of the episode, and it was quite an enjoyable scene. I really enjoyed everything that the episode does with the Doctor, and a lot of the best moments of this episode do surround her in some way. Firstly, the eerie scene of her with Ada had a really great atmosphere, and I liked how that led to the next part of the story. The thing that really sells Spyfall Part 2 for me as a great episode of this show is definitely Sacha Dhawan's portrayal of the Master. He feels very suited to this specific incarnation of the Doctor, and I absolutely love the dynamic that the two of them have. A great duality between these two characters can really sell a good episode and really bring the episode to the next level, and I think that's what happened for me with Spyfall. The first time we see the Master in this episode is with Daniel Barton in his TARDIS, and he has a really interesting interior to his TARDIS because it really just looks like the interior of a house, not like any TARDIS that we've seen before. So when I say interesting, I mean interesting not in the sense that it's visually interesting, but just in the choice that they made. This wasn't a problem for me. It wasn't interesting way to see the TARDIS. Also, I'm glad that we actually see the Master TARDIS because I don't think we have up until this point in the modern series. John Simm's incarnation used the Doctor's TARDIS. I don't think Missy's was ever shown, and although the Master's was referenced in The Doctor Falls, I don't think we ever actually saw it, so I enjoyed that, and I also appreciate that we are still seeing the Time Vortex fairly frequently. That's a pretty cool thing, and it looks very visually interesting. He shows up again meeting the Doctor back in 1843, where he enters the room completely commanding the space, and this, for me, is the point when the episode kicked in an extra notch and went from good to great. I absolutely adore the way that he shows up and just starts miniaturizing people with such glee. He really did feel like the Master without feeling as though he was copying any specific incarnation. I definitely feel that he has the most John Sim in him, but he still felt distinctly different, and he felt a little less insane and a little bit more together than John Sim's incarnation. There's a great moment where he tries to remove the Doctor's dignity by making her kneel and call him Master, and I love this because not only does it feel like something that the character would do, but it also showcases an interesting aspect of their relationship and gives a look into what his goal is. Also, he doesn't really succeed. Even kneeling down and calling him Master, she still manages to keep some dignity. Also, the episode has some well-used hidden exposition with the grenade and the gun, and I thought that was pulled off pretty nicely. There's also a great moment when the Doctor figures out that the Master doesn't know about where she was transported to, and that's a really interesting revelation, and it plays really well into the way that this story concludes. Side note, there's a moment where the Doctor calls herself the apparating man before correcting herself to lady, and I really enjoyed this moment, and it didn't feel forced in any way, and it was entertaining. I have seen a couple of people take issue with this, but I think if we're being realistic, if she lived over 2,000 years as a man and has only been a woman for theoretically as little as just a couple of years, then it is perfectly reasonable that she would slip up on occasion when referencing her gender. And we don't really know how long 13 has been around for, but it can't have been long because she's been with these companions most of the time and they don't seem to have aged much. So she's theoretically only been around them for a year or a few years, and we don't really know at the end of the day how long it was. We do get to see the Silver Lady, which had actually cropped up in the last episode, and we do get to understand a little bit better what its purpose in this story is. We learn that what we saw in the last episode was not actually multiple realities, but actually the same Earth across multiple time periods. That was an interesting revelation and makes sense within the context of what this story is actually doing. And I do really like how the Doctor spent time in a couple of different time periods with both Ada and Noor. That helped to give the episode a bit of a different flavor and let the episode be more visually pleasing by showcasing some different locations, and it goes without saying that this show looks as gorgeous as ever. It's far from the best looking show on television, but it still looks absolutely fantastic, especially when contrasted with the previous eras of the show. And I really do enjoy the characters of Ada and Noor. These are important individuals whose stories I haven't heard of before, and they were a full presence within the episode. I enjoyed getting a glimpse into who they were, although they weren't a huge part of this episode. They really added to it, and I'm glad that they were in it. I really enjoyed the contact moment with the repeating beeps and how that led to a brilliant scene with the Master and the Doctor. In this scene, we do first learn that Gallifrey has been destroyed. All of the Time Lords have been annihilated. This was a shocking revelation to me. My jaw dropped because I really wasn't expecting anything relating to Gallifrey to crop up in this episode. Although the Doctor didn't believe the Master at first, I did believe him because I didn't think there was any reason for him to lie. Although, in fairness, the character had done so before to Capaldi's Doctor. During this episode, we do spend some quality time with the companions, and I really like what it's done with them in the story. Usually, they spend most of their time with the Doctor, so I did appreciate getting to spend some time with them trying to manage on their own. I have seen people draw parallels between them being on the run and the Sound of Drums, which is only natural because in content they are rather similar. I immediately thought of that episode when we saw that they were fugitives, and that's not really a complaint, more of a noteworthy observation. I did feel that this episode offered something different with them than the Sound of Drums, and also it's a little bit less central to the actual story. My favorite scene with the three of them was probably a scene where they're all sitting down and talking together. I really enjoyed the moments that come out of this scene and just the quiet, intimate nature of it while also having fun elements. My main takeaway was that they actually discussed how secretive the Doctor has been about who she is, and it made me really excited for what was to come in the future of these characters. It's something that has come up before, but it wasn't something I was really sure they were going to delve into, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. Also, Yaz calls her sister in this episode, and we do get a small glimpse at her family, and once again, that was an aspect I appreciated because we saw them sparingly throughout Series 11, only twice if I recall correctly, so it was good to show that Yaz does have a connection with them, and I'm glad that the show hasn't forgotten about them. Another thing in this episode worth mentioning is this sequence with the laser shoes, which I've heard some people complain about, and I think it is a fair thing to take issue with. For me, the scene started and I thought, this is absolutely absurd, what am I watching? But as ridiculous as it is, it couldn't help but grow on me. I think largely down to Bradley Walsh's performance in this scene and the way that he treats the scene, because he's got this balance of being smug and being lighthearted, which just helps to sell the scene. Also, I think it fits in with what I mentioned before, which is the James Bond elements of the story. It's absolutely ridiculous, and the episode treats it as such, although the episode is in part just trying to be a James Bond film in style. It also plays with that to an extent by showcasing how ridiculous some of these gadgets are, so I felt that added something in terms of making this episode a little bit more interesting. So yeah, it's completely ridiculous, and if you didn't enjoy it, it's completely understandable to me, but it worked for me because of the way it takes a spin on the James Bond style. Anyway, I'm taking way too much time talking about the laser shoes. Let's move on. At the end of the episode, we see our companions trying to stop the Kasavans, and the Master shows up, now having lived through 77 years, which at first I loved, but after thinking about it for a little bit, I have a million questions about what he got up to in that time, because the Master was on Earth for a lot of that time, but we don't really have time for that right now. So, the Doctor basically gives him to the Kasavans by letting them in on the fact that the Master was planning to betray them after he got what he wanted, and I thought this was a pretty satisfying way to end this story, having the Master contribute partly to his own demise. Also, we do learn within this episode that the reason the Master, Daniel Barton, and the Kasavans are working together is that they have goals that somewhat align, and the episode doesn't go very far into exactly how these goals fit together, but through my second viewing, I was able to get a clearer picture of how they do all align, at least temporarily, with Daniel Barton wanting to reformat humanity, the Kasavans wanting to take over the universe, and the Master wanting to destroy humanity, so I thought it was a fair enough reason for them to be temporarily cooperating with one another. There was a great scene in which the Doctor wipes the memories of both Ada and Noor, and I thought that these were very tasteful scenes that showed the Doctor doing something she had to do, even if she ultimately wasn't happy about taking these memories away from these two people. It is a little bit heartbreaking, even though the scenes are so small. That was well handled, I thought. In terms of general complaints about this episode, I do have a couple of complaints in Netflix. One of the things that didn't completely work for me was Daniel Barton. Although the actor Lenny Henry gives a really good performance in the role, I wasn't entirely clear on his motivations throughout my first viewing of the episode. The second time around, it worked a little bit better, but still, he feels like he would work better if he was given his own episode, and he wasn't an element at play here. He works fine. It just feels as though he's one of the things that gets a little bit more lost within the context of this story, and I don't fully understand his motivations, especially relating to his mother. So that was, I thought, one of the weaker elements of the story, even though those scenes do work in sort of the story while viewing it. When I actually sit back and think about it, it doesn't work for me as well. Also, by the end of the episode, it tries to have a message about the dangers of technology, but when Daniel Barton was giving his speech, I was caught off guard and I couldn't help but think, whoa, how did we get here? Through my second viewing of this episode, I kept more of an eye out for how this theme fit within the episode, and while there wasn't a lot of stuff hidden within the episode, I did feel that it worked better for me on a second viewing, possibly because it was less jarring. Though I did enjoy it more the second time, I couldn't help but feel that this message was a little bit half-baked, and probably would have benefited from, like Daniel Barton, being in a separate episode entirely, although I did like how this message about technology did tie in somewhat with the actual resolution of the story, with the Doctor betraying the Master. There's a level of irony to that which I appreciate. And now we're going to get into the final few minutes of the episode, and the reason that this episode wasn't just a great episode, but one that left me with my jaw to the floor. We saw the Doctor waiting in the TARDIS for a little bit before we see her take off in the TARDIS with a very determined look on her face, and we get this truly heartbreaking end to the episode where the Doctor returns to Gallifrey to find her home has in fact been completely destroyed. The Citadel and the surrounding area are in complete ruins. Jodie Whittaker's performance in this scene is incredible, and she's showing both the heartbreak and the shock of seeing her home world like this, and she did a fantastic job. And what she learned at the end of the story is game-changing. Not only does she find out that the Master destroyed Gallifrey, but he also did so because of the lie of the Timeless Child. This raises so many questions and appears to be setting up a massive story arc, and I can't wait to see how it unfolds, but regardless of how it will conclude, this is an intriguing setup. Also, I love the final scene of this story with the Doctor and her companions. They ask her about where she's from, and this time, she actually tells them. It's a great way to end this episode, seeing the Doctor be a little bit more open with the gang about who she is, and this moment was nothing short of crushing.
Another time.
Overall, I thought this was a great conclusion to this two-part story. It's a well-paced and well-balanced episode with a genuinely great accomplishment considering how much this story has to balance. We have some great scenes with our companions, and most of the elements in this story are pulled off well and result in a thoroughly engaging second part. The Master and the Doctor's dynamic really sells this episode and makes it a truly great one, with the brilliant ending lifting this whole thing up that extra notch. I absolutely loved this story, and it's easily my favorite of the Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker era so far, and I'm going to give Spyfall Part 2 a rating of 9.75 out of 10. I know that rating is going to seem really high to some of you watching, and make no mistake, it is, but I just thought the episode was that good. It's almost certainly in my top 20 The Arrived show, probably not quite top 10 material. Yeah, it was fantastic. There are definitely some elements I want to discuss in further detail, specifically the Master, Gallifrey, the Timeless Child, and what implications they leave for the future of the show, but those are probably all going to get separate videos because this review is going to take long enough to edit as is. If you join me again next week, I will try to get out a review of Orphan 55 as soon as possible. This one took me quite a while, so I'm expecting the next one to also take several days, maybe even longer, but I'll try to at least get my first impressions of the episode out the day of. That way you can get an idea of my initial reaction, and hopefully you'll see my in-depth review later in the week. That's my goal, and I'm sorry if it takes a little longer than that. So I hope to see you around for those videos, but if not, just know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.